you are seriously, as a chemistry teacher, arguing that the world is only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's just dotty. You cannot say that. You can perfectly well be a creationist, be a Christian, and say, yes, I believe that the world is 4.5 billion years old, and that God created life, or God created the universe, but don't fly in the face of what are obviously true facts. Maybe one of these days I'll have a deathbed conversion and believe in some sort of personal God, but I sure as hell won't believe the world's only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's just ridiculous. As you say, scientists are fallible, all humans are fallible. Nevertheless, the massive body of scientific evidence points one way. Surely you owe it to the children to teach that massive body of evidence, rather than the writings of more fallible humans who were writing in the last couple of thousand years.
I think the way the science has gone since Darwin has been very defensive on the part of creationist people like myself. I think it's only in the past, let's say, 50 years, since Crick and Watson, since the discovery of the incredible molecular complexity of life, that new evidence is emerging, such as things that have been assumed to be very old are now being proved to be much younger. In this very town at the university, apparently a Neanderthal skull was found to be only 250 years old. They could still smell the tissue.
Apparently is a very worrying word. It's a very pernicious word. I would question that, apparently, very, very strongly. There is no Neanderthal skull that is that recent. It is perfectly true that molecular evidence has shown that things are a lot more recent than we thought. For example, the evolutionary split between humans and chimpanzees is now known to be approximately between 5, 6, 7 million years, which is a lot more recent, much older than you'd think, but it's a lot more recent than was previously thought when all we had was fossils. It's true that molecular evidence has changed some of the details of what we know about evolution, but always in a productive, constructive direction. And when you say that since Watson and Crick, new evidence has come to light, of course it has, and the new evidence is hugely and overwhelmingly confirming the tree of life, with minor details changing here and there, the tree of life that we'd already put together on comparative anatomy and fossil evidence.
As I said, I think the methodology behind radiometric dating is flawed, but new evidence is coming to light. The amount of helium trapped in zircon crystals, the amount of helium in our own atmosphere, with all the alpha particle decay that's going on, the amount of number of sodium ions in the sea. There are things that would cap the age of the Earth at thousands of years. And again, on the principle of falsifiability, it only needs one of those to be shown to be correct for all the others, the dating methods, to be proved false.
Let me just confirm this. You are a teacher of science in a major British school, and you think that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Now,
but let me go back to what I teach the children outside formal chemistry lessons. In chemistry, all I will do when I come across something that would perhaps challenge the preconceptions they have from biology is to just raise questions. And I think that is what a liberal education is all about. I'm not an American fundamentalist, right-wing, censor this, censor that. I want evolution to be taught. I want it to be set up, but to be able to criticise it as well seems taboo these days. And
no, I mean, I think it's right that we should teach controversial subjects, and we should encourage children to think for themselves. There is, of course, plenty of controversy within evolution. I mean, evolutionists disagree about all sorts of things, and that would be fine. But when you say, people say things like teach both sides of the controversy, that rather supposes that there is a controversy and that there are two sides to it. I mean, why teach the biblical form? Why not teach the Hindu version with the cosmic butter churn, or the Igbo version of the world coming from the excrement of ants? I mean, there's any number of creationist theories that you could pick on.
Well,
what's special about the Judeo-Christian one?
Well, I'm afraid I am an atheist regarding all gods other than the Judeo-Christian one. I have to confess that. But that is my belief. What I think children are taught, though, these days, is very much a one-sided picture. My syllabus, things changed about 3 years ago. The QCA and the government put out a syllabus saying children should be taught how science works. A lot of what has happened in the last few years in my own teaching has come from the guidelines that children ought to now know, the principles of scientific methodology. Therefore, I have responded to things that are well documented, and I will pass them over at the end, to show that from our syllabuses we have to be taught in biology, for example. Children should know at GCSE the conflicting theories, plural, other than Darwinian evolution. Now, what does that mean? Lamarck was discredited 50 years before Darwin, was he not? I mean, what theories do they have in mind? I could show you a part of a chemistry syllabus that actually mentions the word creationism and mentions Bishop Ussher, whose name is spelt wrongly. But I could show you that. Now, what is the point of the exam boards putting in things like that if they are then taboo in the classroom?
Creationists love to act like one strange claim can erase 150 years of science. It cannot. Evolution is supported by fossils, DNA, anatomy, and observed natural selection. Neanderthals were not walking around 250 years ago. The evidence places them tens of thousands of years in the past. The real issue is simple. Science changes when better evidence appears. Religion protects old claims from being tested. Genesis belongs in a theology discussion, not a biology classroom. If creationism had real scientific evidence, it would not need special pleading in schools.
Well, I'm not going to defend the exam board. I am going to defend the idea that scientific controversy should be taught and that children should be encouraged to think for themselves, and there are very many important controversies within science, but this isn't one of them. Now, let me just make a distinction between teaching in general studies, which I understand you also do,
yes, I do,
as well as teaching in chemistry. I mean, do you think perhaps that that the right place to teach this kind of thing is in, what shall we say, history of ideas?
Okay, I mean, I think the argument most evolutionists would come up with is to say these things belong in religion. But on a practical level, that is unfair, because I've been at the same school for 35 years, and I don't think I've come across any of the, well, it's at least in double figures, RE teachers who would have any science training at all, who would feel competent to deal with the sort of questions children ask. They would just say, go and ask the science teachers. And so if you say, we cannot have this taught in science, you're effectively condemning to the children to be indoctrinated with what I believe to be atheism. Because I think atheism and evolution go together, as your book says, and your book is an apologetic for atheism. And fair enough, that's fine, as long as you don't mind me in the classroom saying there is another side of the story.
I'm somewhat unusual in taking that view. The majority of my scientific colleagues, whether they're atheists themselves, would probably believe that you could be both religious and an evolutionist at the same time, as would essentially all educated churchmen.
They might say that, but I think things have changed in the last few years, and discoveries have been made, which, and the more we discover, the more staggering they become. That the Earth isn't very old, that evolution as a theory does fall at certain stages. There's no easy path up mountain, probably, if I may borrow a phrase from yourself. And I mean, I'm very amused by the titles of your books, because you seem to bring religious titles into science, what are essentially science books, and you will deny me the right to do that in my lessons to bring religion in. But anyway, never mind.
Religious language is a part of our culture.
And so it should be in a science classroom too. But I don't brainwash the children with religion in a chemistry lesson. This year, since articles about myself appeared in the Guardian and the Independent, I've been asked by the school to teach general studies, which again is quite a difficult A level with a syllabus. And my brief is to teach history and philosophy of science. And I was given on the first day back this school year, this is what you should teach, Mr. Cowan. And the first was the theory of evolution and other theories, plural, of origins, plural. Now, I again take that as a remit to offer the children the idea that is prevalent and growing, whether we like it or not, that there is another, you know this from biology. Well, I'm going to show you these DVDs from the Truth in Science organisation, which has reputable scientists at its head, and I will...
did you say reputable scientists?
Oh, yes, there's one with a doctorate at the University of Leeds, for example.
Oh, wonderful, yes. I think I know the one you mean.
I think we both know him too. Well, all right, but this is a...
He, by the way, is a professor of thermodynamics, who thinks that evolution violates the second law of thermodynamics.
Well, it doesn't, because the sun is a source of energy.
Yes,
but
exactly.
I would say undirected energy is rather like putting a bull in a china shop. It does not create order. It needs intelligence and energy.
Well, undirected energy won't create order, but what will create order is non-random natural selection. And that seems to be the one thing that you people don't get. Natural selection is not random. Repeat, natural selection is not random, it's the very opposite of random.
But, okay, we're getting off the subject again, but it doesn't matter. Going back to mutation, mutation seems to me to damage DNA rather than to create anything new. That's my problem.
The vast majority of mutations damage DNA. The vast majority of mutations are changes in the wrong direction. It's the minority that are in the right direction, which are favoured by natural selection. That's the non-random arrow that points evolution in a constructive direction.
All right. I mean, I get children at school coming to me saying, Mr. Cowan, we've heard you don't believe in evolution, with incredulity. And I say, well, yes, I do, but it depends what you mean by evolution. If you mean changes in time within a species, no problem at all. If you call it, whether you call that variation or microevolution, I have no problem with those things. The problem I have is with speciation, with macroevolution. And I liken this to drawing a graph on the board with 3 points and extending the graph 10 miles without any further evidence.
Well, there's a lot of further evidence. I mean, you're right, of course, that we believe that macroevolution is microevolution produced over a long period, and there's no reason why that shouldn't happen. There are some cases where it seems to have happened remarkably quickly. I mean, we know, for example, that Lake Victoria is only about 100,000 years old. It's very, 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 very young. And during that time, about 450 species of cichlid fish have all evolved, apparently from a common ancestor. And that's very fast. Again, it's not fast by your standards. You think the world's only 6,000 years old, but nevertheless, by evolution, by scientific standards, 100,000 years is an eye blink.
But I would say they're all fish. They're all cyclic fish. Well, I'm not a biologist, of course.
Well, of course they're all fish, but I mean, fish are enormously variable.
They're not reptiles, they're not amphibians.
It just takes a bit longer, that's all. It just takes
well,
a
you
bit
see,
longer.
that's where we would disagree. And I think children need to know that even within the world of evolutionary theory, there are problems. There are problems with the Big Bang theory, as it's taught in a godless way by scientists. But back to general studies, I feel as children already know a lot about evolution from GCSE biology, then by showing the truth in science material, I'm, in a sense, redressing the balance. And I'm basically a liberal. I'm not a fundamentalist right-winger, as in you might find in the USA. I just think children deserve to know both sides of the story and make an informed decision. But the way I think things are going in education is that there is howls of protest about what I should be teaching. When it came out in the newspapers that Mr. Cowan is a creationist, there's a storm of protest, and I've been, warned I mustn't bring the school into disrepute. But I would say it's not fair on the children to censor, to withhold this information from them. And yes, maybe it does belong in religious studies, but I don't know any RE teacher, and I apologise to those listening to me who might feel qualified, but the children won't get taught that unless a scientist does it.
Creationism fails because it has no working scientific mechanism. Evolution has one: inherited variation plus natural selection over time. We see new species form in real life, including hundreds of cichlid fish species in African lakes. We see DNA patterns match common ancestry. We see antibiotic resistance evolve when bacteria survive pressure and pass traits forward. Religion starts with an answer and protects it. Science starts with evidence and lets the answer change. That is why Christianity can be discussed in philosophy or religion class, but it does not earn a seat next to biology.
As we were saying earlier, there are, of course, many Christians who believe in creation in some sense, believe that God maybe started the universe off, maybe God even started life off. But they're evolutionists because the evidence is so strong. Why do you put yourself in such an extraordinarily difficult situation? I mean, you are seriously, as a chemistry teacher, arguing that the world is only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's just dotty. You cannot say that. You can perfectly well be a creationist, be a Christian, and say, yes, I believe the world is 4.5 billion years old, and that God created life or God created the universe, but don't fly in the face of what are obviously true facts.
There are theologians through the ages, like, not my favourite theologian, but St. Augustine, who would say, why did God take as long as 6 days to do it? Why is it so short? James Ussher has a bad reputation. I think his work is a work of scholarship. I think it's good stuff. I've got some material about Ussher's origin of the Earth.
James Ussher was the bishop who calculated the age of the Earth by adding up all those begats and and who lived, and then worked out that it was 4004 BC.
Yes.
On October the
23rd, I think.
October the 23rd at 9 a.m. was it?
Well, it was evening and morning the first day. We don't know what time. I wouldn't go as far as Ussher, but I would say he was about right. And you see, this is the point. We start with a belief. I believe in a transcendent God. And once you do that, I'm afraid you can... the evidence from Scripture draws me to that conclusion. And increasingly, the evidence from science draws me to that conclusion. I haven't always thought this way, of course. I became a Christian, and what I like in your book, by the way, is I agree there's no such thing as a Christian child or a Catholic child or a Muslim child. I think that was excellent. I became a Christian 22 years ago. And for many years, even as a Christian, I struggled to reconcile the stuff I was taught, the way in the media one is bombarded with evolution is a fact, isn't it? And it's taken me a long time to unlearn that. And you may think that's going completely in the wrong direction. But there was a time when I believed what you believed. And I'm not sure there's a time when you believe you will. I mean, one day I hope you'll believe what I believe in terms of the existence of a personal God. But on the other hand, mounting evidence that things are younger than they seem.
Well, I mean, maybe one of these days I'll have a deathbed conversion and believe in some sort of personal God, but I sure as hell won't believe the world's only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Well, I'm not sure it is. As I say, if just one method, let's look at Gentry's work on radio halos. I think it's polonium-containing rocks. And again, I'm not a professional geologist, but there are studies on the internet that are available. From websites that you probably wouldn't like answersingenesis.org. But they purport to show that the Earth cannot be more than, say, 10,000 years old.
See, it sounds awfully like special pleading. I mean, what it sounds to me is that you've decided for scriptural reasons that this is what you believe, and then you desperately go around looking for something to fit it, and you find something on some odd website somewhere. But you don't look at the whole corpus of the evidence.
But I've looked at that for years. I think you're right. That is a criticism of the way I teach, but should children have the right to decide on these things? That's my point.
Everybody has the right to decide on
everything.
I'm
not anti the teaching of evolution. I'm not going back to Scopes. I mean, this is wrong. This is the common misconception. I'd like these things taught, but I'd like evolution as it's taught today to be critiqued in a scientific way. In the end, as a person of faith, and I think we all have faith, whether we have faith in the existence or non-existence or non-knowability of God, I think there are only two positions. We either believe or we don't. I think talk about probability in your book, which is very interesting. In the end, there either is a God or there isn't. And I've chosen to ally myself with the fact
You just said
you're
an atheist about all those other gods. I mean, you're an atheist about
yes.
Zeus and Jupiter and
Absolutely
Thor.
right, yeah.
So why choose that one?
I suppose this does come down to personal revelation. I did have an experience of God. I continue to have that experience when I shared it with other people. It seems to be a common experience.
Do you say, I'm the God of the Christians and the Jews? I'm not Zeus, I'm not Jupiter?
No, he's the God of the whole world. But he is not... But he is what we might call Jehovah, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, the father of...
Yeah, but how do you know that? Did he tell you? Did he tell you I'm not Zeus, I'm not Baal, I'm not the God of the Australian Aboriginals?
He didn't, but I went through a phase in my mid-30s where I suppose I was searching, and I read the Quran, I've looked at some Hindu scriptures, I found scientific errors in those, of course, the earth on the back of an elephant.
And you mean you didn't find any in the Bible?
Well, I thought I did at the time, but since I've become a Christian, the more I look at the Bible, it talks about God suspends the earth over nothing, which is gravity, the earth is a sphere, certainly not flat. There are things in the scriptures, actually, that would show that, that it had a supernatural origin, not just the words of men. There's something about the constellations of Pleiades and Orion, which you've probably never looked at in the book of Job, that were only verified in the 1930s when astronomers discovered the difference between a bounded and an unbounded star system. Now, there's a verse in the book of Job, and you might say this is coincidence, that talks about the Pleiades being unbounded and rapidly rushing apart. So, sorry, that's the wrong way around. Pleiades is stationary, so Tycho Brahe would have mapped this the same as we see it today. But Orion is whizzing apart, and all we see are the three stars in a line, the belt. there's a verse that you think, how did they know that? The water cycle is in the Bible. In the end, there are things in Scripture that as a scientist I had to come to terms with and say, who wrote that? And yes, in the end, it was a personal revelation, but only a revelation because I was inquiring, is there a God? And I did that as many people have done over the generations. Did Jesus Christ rise from the dead? What is the evidence, historical evidence, for the resurrection of Christ? And I came to this. It wasn't logic in the end, it was faith.
But
and
once
I had
again,
to trust.
The bishops and vicars would agree about Christ. They would not agree with you about the age of the earth. I think we're not going to agree about that. Let's just say thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
Richard is right here. A Christian can believe in God and still accept basic science. Millions already do. The problem starts when Christianity demands that reality bend around an ancient Bible timeline. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. It is about 4.5 billion years old, and that comes from radiometric dating, meteorites, geology, and the age of the solar system. Human civilization alone goes back farther than 6,000 years in multiple archaeological records. So when Nick defends a young Earth, he is not following evidence. He is protecting doctrine. That is exactly why creationism collapses in a science classroom. It starts with the Bible, then cherry-picks anything that sounds useful. Science starts with the world itself.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you even saying what you said, but I think this is one of the things I'd like to get out of this interview, that, you know, even though we have differences, I do believe that we can discuss these, and I certainly would like to invite you, it's like, not the interview's over now, but I'd like to invite you in the future, if you would so consider, to talk to some of our, I would say, more intellectual minds than myself, who would be able to debate the subject and do it in a gentlemanly way. Because some of the interviews I've seen conducted, particularly one of recent times I saw on YouTube, which I thought you were treated abominably.
Oh, really? I wonder what that one was. I don't remember it.
Was it one of the interviewers in the States where he's like a news presenter, maybe Fox?
Oh, yes. Well, I've done a few of those, yes.
Yeah.
Bill O'Reilly, maybe.
I think that was,
yes,
could be.
yeah.
I think, anyway, it's not the way that I want to conduct our interviews, and indeed any of the debates that may follow with some of the more wiser people that I would like to introduce you to. And I do see you as an English gentleman and not one to be berated, and perhaps people will be angry at me saying that. But I do value your thoughts, and maybe we can arrive at somewhere in the distant future, or not too distant future, at some sort of agreement, even if it's to disagree, but we've talked the way through these, because it is important fundamentally to a Christian, if evolution is, to me, if it is a fact, then we are deluded and we're without hope, as the Bible says.
Oh, well, that's interesting. So you're saying that you do, as it were, put your money on evolution being wrong?
I do personally,
yes.
But there are others in the Christian faith who see evolution as a part of what God's purposes and plans were.
But I've now got you placed then. So all I've got to do is convince you of the truth of evolution. That
yes, I
easy.
suppose that.
Yes.
And I suppose my job is to prove that there is a God. And maybe without doing it in the usual way, that I would share a couple of experiences with you, and then you could tell me, and especially as I haven't read the book,
Right.
God Delusion,
Yes.
then I'm not biased, although I understand that where you're coming from the title, I would nevertheless, value your opinion to put me right so that I can change horses if I have to.
Well, let's get on with it then, shall
Right,
we?
good. Well, one of the things that I do see, and this was a fundamental question at the beginning of my sort of putting the word out to viewers and friends that I'm going to be doing this interview with you today, is that there are 6 billion people on the earth today, and I would say at least 1/3, if not more, have an innate belief in a supernatural being. Let's call him God. If we've evolved, why have we evolved with such a concept to want to worship?
Yes, I think that's not really very difficult. I mean, I think it's very easy to see. You could answer that question psychologically and point out that it can be very comforting to people to believe in some sort of supernatural father who looks after you, takes care of you, maybe raises you from the dead. So it's very easy to see that if people believe what they want to believe, then they're likely to believe in some sort of God. So that would be the psychological answer. I could also give you an evolutionary answer and say why it might be that natural selection of our past ancestors had shaped our brains, or shaped the genes that shaped our brains, to make us believe in, not God necessarily, but to have a sort of psychological predisposition that leads you to believe in God. I'm thinking of things like a tendency to be obedient to authority. I could easily make a Darwinian case for why one should be obedient to authority, especially children perhaps, and from that would follow, under the right cultural conditions, a tendency to believe in God. Of course, when you say that however many billion people it is believe in some sort of God, many of them believe in a very different sort of God, and so it's a sort of shaky ground you're on if you try to build too much on the numbers of billions of people.
It is rather strange to me, anyway, at this stage of my life, to see that there's so many that already it's innate in them to want to believe, even if they're misguided, as perhaps your book goes into.
Yes. Well, I don't find that very persuasive. I mean, it's certainly true, but it doesn't make that a lot of people do believe, but it doesn't make what they believe true.
As I say, I'm going to be conducting this interview not so much in intellectual arguments, because I'm just not on your level, Richard. That's hopefully for the future when we do that with others that will come, if you would so agree to that. But I'm going to read some of the emails and questions that came in from viewers.
Oh, right.
And they'll be along the lines that you'll be very good at answering, I know that, but it will be good for our viewers. And also, in this, what I'm hoping to try and achieve like this is for our viewers to get to know the man, you know, Richard Dawkins, rather than what they perceive or what they hear about you, because the internet's a powerful tool for mistruths. You know, maybe I'll start there. I mean, talk to us about being an atheist, and does that stop you from doing good works? No, of course it doesn't. You know, and all of that sort of thing, because you're as much maligned as an atheist as I am a Christian.
Yes, yes. There's absolutely no reason to think that you need to be a Christian, or indeed a Muslim or anything else, in order to be good. There's no correlation there at all, and it would be not terribly praiseworthy, I think, if that were the case, because if the only reason you were good is that, say, you were afraid of God or something, then I think you would agree with me that that wouldn't be a very noble reason for being good. And so being an atheist shouldn't really have any effect on whether you're good. The other reason you might think people would be good is if they're trying to follow the example of their holy book, the Quran or the Bible, whatever it is. And you get a pretty mixed sort of morals if you follow the Bible. I mean, bits of it are okay, but I don't suppose you would wish to follow everything in the book of Leviticus, for example, or the book of Numbers, or the book of Deuteronomy.
The numbers argument is weak. A billion people can believe something and still be wrong. Popularity does not turn faith into evidence. Humans are pattern-seeking animals. We look for purpose, comfort, protection, and authority, especially when life is painful or uncertain. That explains why religion spreads so easily without proving that any God is real. And Richard is right about morality, too. You do not need Christianity to be good. If someone only behaves because they fear punishment from God, that is not moral strength. That is fear-based obedience. The Bible also cannot be treated like a perfect moral guide when books like Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy contain laws modern Christians would never defend today.
Well, there are some things in there which perhaps could be misconstrued.
Yes, that's one way to put it.
But there are some things in there that are definitely an advantage to us today, and particularly since, well, the last 200 years, we find that the laws on cleanliness are very important, and perhaps came before man realized, and particularly talking on medical science, that they didn't realize, you know, a simple thing like washing your hands before you went from the Godiva to deliver a baby. I mean, that was only something that happened 200 or 300 years ago.
By all means, let's listen to our doctors and read what their medical books say, You don't need to go to the Bible for that now. You can get it from your doctor.
Right, but I mean, the Bible was written according to,
Yes.
even if you disagreed with the timing of it, it certainly was written pre-Christ. So for the laws in Leviticus, on the
But we
laws
don't
of
have to
cleanliness.
go on getting it from Leviticus. We can get it from our doctor now. Yeah.
Right. Okay. This comes in here. Darwin seemed to express that the evolution of the eye was a hard case to explain, says the person who emailed this in to me, Steve, I think it was. Do you have any cases yourself where there is uneasiness with this?
Well, that's a famous quote from Darwin. Darwin said something like, to suppose that the eye, with all its intricate contrivances, he goes on in great detail about how complicated and beautiful the eye is, could come about as a result of evolution by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Words to that effect. That quotation is very often given, but it isn't followed by what Darwin next said, which was to spend a good part of a chapter explaining exactly why actually it is explicable. And it's in a way, it's a good rhetorical technique to, as it were, offer something to your opponents before you then disillusion them. Where it fails is if your opponents then take the offer and then don't quote what follows. So the eye is actually very well explicable by evolution, and I've explained it in especially two of my books, The Blind Watchmaker and Climbing Mount Improbable. But that wasn't the question you asked me. You asked me the question, is there anything that I find particularly difficult? No, because that's not the way science works. We don't say, this is a very difficult case, therefore God must have done it. Therefore, science can't explain it. Therefore, the supernatural must be wheeled in to explain it. That isn't the way we work. If science can't explain it, then we say, all right then, let's go to work. Let's see what we need to do, what new theories we need to bring into our science, how we need to change our science. That technique has always worked so far. If there was something that I was genuinely puzzled about, then my response would not be, oh, it must be supernatural. My response would be, then in that case we must roll our sleeves up and go to work to try to understand it.
Right. Well, because to me, this is, apart from the person who emailed us in, this is really, and I put it at the top of my list because it's something that bothered me when I was growing up, that I thought, how could we have evolved? Because the eye is so complex. For example, we've got cameras in the studio here, and they need camera operators to pull focus and to be able to change shots and everything. And the more distance or close-up you get, you have to change the actual iris of the camera, perhaps even open it or close it a little bit. So that's all done instantaneously within the brain, the human brain. And it's so complex that I thought, how could we have been bumping around without sight for thousands or millions of years if we've evolved, when really it needed to be functioning from the word go?
Well, yes, all right, I will answer that question. Certainly, you're absolutely right. The eye is a most remarkable organ, and it does the same sorts of things that these television cameras do. It does instant focusing. It does instant stopping down with the iris diaphragm. It's got full colour, three colour vision, just like modern televisions have, and it is a remarkably beautiful. It's not totally flawless. There are interesting flaws, interesting imperfections, which actually are revealing. Nevertheless, it does work very well, and an engineer would give it somewhat high marks for being well, quote, designed. Now, you raise the question, doesn't it all have to be working before it'll work, it's any good? How could we bump along for millions of years with only half an eye? That's a bit of a fallacy, because actually only a quarter of an eye, only a hundredth of an eye is better than nothing. You can make a slowly climbing ramp of improvement from just the very rudiments of vision, just say being able to tell the difference between light and shade, nothing more than that, right up to the perfection of a human eye or the eye of a hawk, say. And in order for evolution to explain that, all we need is that there should be a ramp of improvement where every step, a hundredth of an eye, 2/100ths of an eye, 3/100ths of an eye, etc., 50% of an eye, 51% of an eye. Each step has got to be an improvement on the one that went before. And it's easy to see why that would be. You start by being able to tell whether there's a shadow, whether it's night or day. Shadow's useful. That could be a predator moving overhead in the sea. Night or day is obviously useful for all sorts of purposes. Then you could imagine a cup. Instead of just having a flat sheet of light-sensitive cells, the edges turn up into a cup. Now, the cup means that if there's light coming from that direction, it hits that part of the eye. If there's light coming from that direction, it hits that part of the eye. So already the animal can tell the direction from which light is coming and the direction from which a shadow is coming. So we haven't got an image yet. All we've got is the direction of light. Now the cup can steadily and slowly over evolutionary time close over until you end up with a little hole at the top. And the little hole at the top, the same principles working all the way, that light coming from that direction hits that part of the retina, and from that direction hits this part of the retina. But because there's a hole, it's rather more precisely, not exactly focused, but light from there hits there, light from there hits there, light from there hits there, because it's got to get through the hole. We're moving towards a pinhole camera. Now, a pinhole camera, if you make the hole small enough, and remember we're having a smooth gradient of closing up the hole, if you make the hole small enough, then it makes a sharp, focused image. The trouble with a pinhole camera is that the image is very dim because very little light can get through the pinhole. What you need is a lens, because what a lens does is gather light from different directions and focus it on a point. Instead of it having to go right through the middle of the hole, it can be gathered from a wider range of sources. Now, a lens is not difficult to arrange. Any old chunk of transparent gubbins will do the job better than a pinhole. So once again, we've got a slow, gradual improvement. Any old lump of gubbins, transparent, is better than nothing, and then the lens simply improves its shape gradually, 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 gradually. It's got to be gradually. Every step has got to be a slight improvement over the previous one. You get a lens.
Eyes do not need to appear fully formed in one miracle jump. Simple light-sensitive cells already give an animal an advantage. A shallow cup helps detect direction. A deeper cup improves accuracy. A small opening creates a rough image. A basic lens makes that image brighter and sharper. Every step helps survival, so every step can be selected. That is why the God explanation is weak. It takes a hard question and turns it into a magic answer.
Can I just ask you though, Richard?
Yes.
How long did this process take?
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, we've got hundreds of millions of years to play with, because that's what geological time gives us. I mean, we've got maybe 1 billion years since the first focusing eye appeared.
What about the trilobite?
Trilobites have very beautiful eyes.
Very, very clever. I mean, it's amazing.
They have compound eyes, which is what modern insects and crustaceans have.
But the trilobite has, in the fossil record, is exactly the same today as it was, or in that sense, it didn't evolve. It had those lenses.
Trilobites today.
No, I mean, but it had the lens mechanism, which is
no,
quite powerful.
Well, trilobites have compound eyes, which is a very different principle and very interesting principle. It doesn't focus quite as sharp an image as our eyes do, but it is a very beautiful thing. And trilobites do go back hundreds of millions of years, 500 million years, 500 million years. It must have taken some time before trilobites came on the scene, but even trilobites are relatively recent compared to the age of the Earth, which is 4.5 billion years old.
Obviously, of course, as a creationist or believer in creation, the Book of Genesis, you know, I would disagree with that. But
what would you disagree with?
With the time.
How old do you think the world is then?
I would say that because I'm a Bible-believing Christian, that I believe that the Book of Genesis is in actual fact the record, because Christ as well referred often to the Book of Genesis, that in the beginning, Adam and Eve, and I know that. But before we get onto that, because we can come back to that,
all right.
is that there is an email that came in with regards to the eye, which I'd like to read, because
Yes.
it's quite intelligently written. In Richard's book, The Greatest Show on Earth, and he gives the pages, etc., he claims the retina could not have been designed, as creationists say, because the photoreceptors are at the back rather than the front. So it is back to front. And it was a fact, he said, if it was created, it was the design of an idiot. Just stop there. Recent research has shown that there are cells in the retina that guide light to the photoreceptors and refocus it. The scientists who did this research described the light-guiding cells in the retina structure with the words optimal design for improving the sharpness of images, and that's from Physical Review letters, etc., etc. Will Richard admit he is wrong, since he is not an expert on optics and the researchers are?
Well, no, I will not admit I'm wrong. This is a very interesting case. The retina is back to front. The retina of the vertebrate eye is back to front, in the sense that the light-sensitive cells are pointing away from the light. Now, the light-sensitive cells are connected to the brain via nerves, and any sensible designer would have had the nerves behind the light-sensitive cells, which is in fact the way they are in mollusks, for example, octopuses, which have rather good eyes, rather like ours, with the difference being that the light-sensitive cells point towards the light, and the wires connecting it to the brain lead backwards to the brain, which is the sensible way to do it. Now, the vertebrate eye is back to front, so that the wires that connect the light-sensitive cells to the brain are running along the front of the retina. That means that the light has to penetrate this forest of wires, nerves, before it hits the light-sensitive cells, which are facing backwards. Now, it's very easy to see why this happened. It happened for historical reasons, and there's no doubt about that. Now, it is, of course, true that humans, for example, and I mentioned hawks before, see much better than octopuses. So in spite of the fact that our eye has this design flaw, we have better eyes because natural selection comes along afterwards and cleans up after the original mess that was made by this fundamental design flaw. Natural selection came along afterwards and made all sorts of little titivations which have the effect of giving us really rather good vision. And that happens again and again. It's very interesting that you get a bungle to begin with, and then rather than correct the bungle, what natural selection does is to come along and make little titivations, little tinkerings, which sort of make up for the mistake. And that's a very interesting phenomenon.
I'd like to go back to the timing.
Yes.
Of when do you say that we reached our optimum where we're at today? How far back would you have to go? 10?
Oh, I wouldn't use a word like optimum. I mean,
because you think we're still evolving, obviously.
Well,
but where we're at today, then?
Well, what I'd prefer to say is that natural selection is constantly working, and the environment is constantly changing, if only because the predators, the enemies, the parasites of any particular species are also evolving. And so you never really reach a sort of finished, settled optimum. There's always more improvement that can happen.
What about other parts of the body, which to me, I mean, as I say, just as a layman, I had to come to terms with, how on earth did we function? And the heart, for example, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, and particularly, don't want to be too personal, but how do I take a leak if I have to wake up a few million years to do that?
Wait a minute, I don't understand.
Well, if I was to go to the toilet,
yes.
I mean, how did we evolve with the ability to release waste if we were waiting for certain organs to develop?
Well, no, it's not really like that.
I know it's a simple question, but I'm a simple man. I
mean, you don't wait millions of years. It all happens. There's a continual improvement going on all the time, continual changing. I mean, the way things work is different now from the way it used to be. I mean, I tried to give you a rather detailed exposition of the eye, and you switched to something else. I mean, did you find that convincing, what I said about the eye?
Well, not really.
Well,
but I understand And
well,
I don't
why
mean
not?
it
Because
condescending, but
I gave you the gradual ramp of improvement. What I didn't quite have time to say is that if you look around the animal kingdom today, and you mentioned trilobites, but there are lots and lots of animals which show eyes in all sorts of what we might think of as states of sort of half development. I mean, there are flatworms that have just a cup for an eye, no lens, not even a pinhole. There are animals like Nautilus, which is a sort of coiled up squid kind of thing in a shell, which has a pinhole camera for an eye. So each step of the way that I told you about might have been hypothetical, but you can find an animal somewhere around the animal kingdom, a living animal, which actually does it. So I don't understand why you don't find that convincing.
If the body was perfectly designed by an all-knowing creator, why do we find so many workarounds? The human eye has a blind spot because nerves pass in front of the retina. Octopuses do not have that same wiring problem. That makes way more sense under evolution. Life gets patched over time from older structures. It does not get rebuilt from scratch like perfect engineering. And when Christians ask, how did organs evolve? They are pretending evolution means waiting helplessly for a finished body part. That is not biology. Existing systems change slowly, step by step, while still working. The animal kingdom shows living examples of simpler eyes, pinhole eyes, compound eyes, and camera-like eyes.
Just couldn't understand it. Now, I know the scriptures, you know, where it says he will baptize you with fire as well as with water and all of that. And the next day, Richard, I'm praying with somebody who was in the classroom with me. There was a need for prayer, and we held hands. And this electrical power came back out from my torso in reverse and went down my hands and into this person. Now, I didn't say anything. I thought, oh my goodness, what is happening? And this person went like that. And she said, what was that? And I said, what was what? You know, I wasn't going to have any nonsense, okay? And she said, I felt some electrical power come out of you. And I said, what on earth is going on? This person who was sitting next to me in the classroom the day before, amongst these other 30 people, and my wife, said, I saw exactly what happened. And I said, how could you see? I was really not wanting to, I was trying to play devil's advocate in this sense. I said, how could you see, nobody else see? See what? She said, and she described this beam that came out through the ceiling, went straight into my back, and then exactly that.
Yes, well, look, you said you weren't impressed with my account of the eye. I'm afraid I'm not very impressed with anecdotes.
Let me finish. I went out into one of the villages surrounding Barahona. The previous day we'd buried a child that had starved to death. We couldn't help that particular child. Mercy Ships helps lots of people successfully, usually. This was an occasion we couldn't help. And we went to support the family. When we were up in the hills, there was just myself and another person at that time, and we heard this incredible noise, like animal noise, like somebody crying, screaming, whatever. And because I don't speak Spanish, they grabbed hold of me, a few people, and they pulled me and this other guy to witness. There was a slab of concrete about the size of this, because they live in very poor conditions. It was just like cardboard walls, but some had a concrete slab for their foundation. And this elderly lady was on the floor, perspiring. She soaked the concrete so much, so she was crying unbelievably. And then somebody pulled us from there and took us into this hut, makeshift hut. And there was a young girl lying there. And she was covered from head to foot in like boils, from what I could see. Terrible sores. And she was laid still. And I thought, what do I do? I'm a novice. I just prayed. I said, what would Jesus do? And I just prayed, Lord, make her well. She sat bolt right up. And I said, what? And I thought, what else do I do? I'm a simple man. Read the scriptures before, and Jesus said, give her water. That's from the time when he was doing something similar. And so I did that. And I didn't know it at the time, but apparently the lady that was outside bemoaning had been there for hours because her daughter had apparently died. Now, this electrical power comes out of my body. How do you describe that? Am I deluded?
Probably, yes. I mean, scientists are not impressed by anecdotes. If you could get a scientist to measure I don't know, your galvanic skin response, you might get some sort of scientific interest in that. But it really, I mean, there are thousands of stories all over the world. People have ghost stories, people have stories of demonic possession, all different religions. They're just not impressive, I'm afraid, to a scientist. And in particular, what I'd like to concentrate on is why, even if these experiences happen to you, why on earth would that make you believe in the Book of Genesis, given that all the scientific evidence is against it, given that the Archbishop of Canterbury is against it, given that the Pope is against it, given that any respectable bishop is against it? Why would you go from having electrical tingling down your back to saying that the Book of Genesis has got to be true? Why tie it to the Book of Genesis?
All right. When I first read the Bible, the things that attracted me or impressed me was the prophetic value of Scripture. As a man, I wasn't as emotionally involved as, say, my wife would have been, because at that stage I wasn't sort of in love with Jesus. So I needed more sort of facts, if you like. And historically, I know you probably could argue the points about this, but there were prophecies in the Bible that actually were fulfilled.
Like what?
Well, just talking about the birth, for example, of Jesus, in the book of Micah, which is written apparently 500 years before Christ came, explaining that he'd be born in Ephratah, Bethlehem. And even Herod, who was definitely not a believer, asked his wise men to find out where it was and how it was and when it would be that this Messiah would come, because Herod actually...
But surely you know that the Gospels were written in the way they were in order to fulfill those Old Testament prophecies.
No, I know you would say that, Richard,
well,
but I
that's
don't
what
believe
New Testament
it.
scholars say.
I like you
but in
say,
any
I'm
case,
not
it's nothing to do with Genesis. I mean, you're talking about Micah now. Genesis...
Well, I could mention loads. What about the Babylonian exile, Jeremiah, the prophet?
Look, that's not relevant to the Book of Genesis, where you say, on the strength of the Book of Genesis, you believe that the world is, what, only 6,000 years old, something like
Yes.
that? Yeah, okay. Now, that, as you know, flies in the face of all the scientific evidence. It flies in the face of all the bishops, all the archbishops, the cardinals, Pope.
Not
Why
all
would
of them,
you...
but some, yes,
well, most of them.
Yeah.
Why would you put your money on the Book of Genesis, nothing to do with Jeremiah, nothing to do with Micah, it's the Book of Genesis. Why would you put your money on that when all the scientific evidence shows, and I mean not a little bit of evidence, but massive quantities of evidence show that the world is 4.5 billion years old? I mean, it's absolutely open and shut case. Look at the science. You can't deny it if you would only look at the science.
Okay, well, you asked me the question, why would I put my faith in Genesis? It is a difficult book, given that there is so much so-called evidence to the contrary, that, or what scientists are talking about as that, you know, the Earth is millions of years old, etc. But Jesus, and I do believe 100% that Jesus did walk this earth and did the things that he did, because there are more manuscripts written about the accounts of the
yes,
gospel.
Yes, but we're not talking Jesus, we're talking Genesis now.
Well, let me get there, Richard, please. Is that Jesus referred to Genesis, okay? And in there, he's not a liar, and he's a man or a being that I would trust. And he spoke about, in the beginning, you know, was Adam and Eve, for example. And he also talks about in Colossians that Jesus is the one who created all things, okay? So if Jesus is the one that I accept, then why should I deny the Genesis account? Because otherwise I'm saying Jesus is a liar.
Well, if you're tying Jesus to a belief that the world is only 6,000 years old, you're not doing Jesus any favours, because what you're in effect saying is that Jesus was anti-scientific, and I don't think Jesus would be very pleased about that. No doubt he was ignorant of science because he lived at a time when science was not developed. But if I were you, I would not tie Jesus, whom you love.
Jesus was not ignorant.
Well,
if you look at, and I was reading again this morning, some of the wisdom that he had, we could do with today.
This is where religion becomes impossible to take seriously as evidence. Personal stories are not proof. Every religion has miracle claims, healing stories, visions, spirits, and supernatural experiences. They cannot all be true. And even if someone felt something strange while praying, that still does not prove Genesis. It does not prove a young earth. It does not prove Christianity over Islam, Hinduism, or any other faith. Richard is right to separate emotion from evidence. A dramatic experience may feel powerful, but science needs testing, measurement, and confirmation. Then the Bible prophecy argument does the same thing. Christians point to verses after the fact and say, "See, it fits." That is not evidence. That is religious storytelling trying to pass as history. And that is why Dawkins keeps cutting through the noise. Creationists bring stories, feelings, and Bible verses. Dawkins brings simple science and basic facts. So what do you think? Did Richard Dawkins shut down creationism with evidence? Or do creationists still have a real argument? Comment your thoughts below, and do not forget to like and subscribe.